All right, well, good morning, folks. So as you can see, Mrs. Hahn is back in the house today. Pretty amazing. She's not officially back to work yet, but she's going to be here with us today for our daily gathering. So it's awesome to have you back, Kim.
Thank you.
So today is Valentine's Day, and we wanted to share a story with you about sacrificial love. So here we go. Thursday, December 1st, 2016, just a few short months ago. And this is a day that I will never forget. So I was driving to school about 7:30 in the morning, and I felt my phone vibrate. And I didn't really think much of it until I was pulling into my parking spot. And so I park, and I pull out my phone, and I see a text from my mom. So I read the text. Natasha is on life support, drug overdose. I'm on my way to the hospital. This is one of those completely unexpected punches in the gut. Natasha, my 19-year-old cousin, who graduated from OSHA 2 years ago, was in her sophomore year at Long Beach State. And so I read this, I'm sitting in my car, and I'm just kind of in shock. And I have a meeting that I needed to get to, so I kind of go into autopilot mode, and I start heading to this meeting. And as I do, I call my mom. I'm like, Mom, what the heck is going on? She basically just reiterates what she said in the text. She didn't know a whole lot else. And my head at this time is just spinning. And so I finish the phone call, and I walk into this meeting, and Pastor Detweiler and Mrs. Eklund and Mrs. Hansen are sitting there, and they see it on my face as I walk in, and they're like, what's going on? And so after I tell them, they kind of look at me, and they're like, what are you still doing here? And I'm like, yeah, you're right, I gotta go. And so I get up and I start heading to the hospital. As I was driving there to Long Beach, 20, 25-minute drive, I'm thinking about my cousin Natasha. And you can see there's a picture of her on the screen. I remember when she was born, I was thinking back to all of the family parties and the holidays that we spent together. She's just the sweetest. Truly always had such a tender heart. And yet she kind of lived on the edge, often chasing the next high. She was a full-time student, and she worked a lot as well, and so she was often pretty stressed out. And as I found out later, she had been struggling with depression as well. So I make it to the hospital, and I see her. She's unconscious. There's tubes everywhere, and I find out what happened. So the night before, which was Wednesday night, Natasha was really stressed about a big test. And after studying, she just felt like she needed to wind down. She had recently gotten a hold of a synthetic opioid called U4, or as it is often called by its street name, Pink or Pinky. This is what Prince died of. And this drug is something that basically just makes you feel good. It makes you feel relaxed. But it's very strong. The research says that this is 7.5 times more powerful than morphine. As such, it's very dangerous and can be fatal. And Natasha, she just wanted to feel better before she went to sleep, and I totally get this. But she took too much, and she wound up unconscious. Her roommate came in about 2 hours later, found her unconscious on her bed. The paramedics came, they took her to the hospital. So I get there, and I'm learning all this, and we knew it wasn't looking good from the start. But as that day went on, again, this is Thursday, her organs started to kick back in. And so this was good news. But the big question remained her brain. She had been without oxygen for a long time. And so after being in the hospital for most of the day, our worst fears were confirmed when the neurologist came in and did a scan of her brain, and he said she has no brain activity. She's brain dead. So we said our goodbyes in the hospital. We cried and we prayed and we held each other. It's a torturous thing to say goodbye to somebody that you know you're never going to see again. So the next day, as you can imagine, it was just kind of a blur. I did come to work, but I don't really remember much. But I do remember a few things. One, that afternoon, that Friday, they had officially pronounced her dead. and we learned that my aunt and uncle had decided to donate her organs. I also got a text from my mom saying that my aunt and uncle were wondering if I would be willing to do the funeral. And I was just like, whoa, like I've never led a funeral, never thought about leading a funeral, and I was obviously still going through my own grieving process. But as I thought and prayed about it, I just felt like this is something I need to do. So after 2 crazy days, we made it to Friday night. And I was sitting on my couch with my wife, and I had my computer open, and randomly I get a G-chat from Mrs. Hahn with a few work questions. And Mrs. Hahn happened to be in dialysis that night because, as you remember, she had been having kidney failure for over 2 years. So my wife leaned over to me, and in a half-joking manner, she just kind of says, wow, wouldn't it be crazy if Kim got one of Natasha's kidneys? And it was, first time I had thought about that, certainly an interesting thought. And so after our work discussion, I figured, what the heck? And I asked Mrs. Hahn, hey, Mrs. Hahn, what's the process for donating organs like?
So since April of last year, I got to spend 3 hours every Monday and every Friday night sitting attached to a machine that would clean my blood because my kidneys hadn't done that well for quite a while. It gave me a lot of time to get work done, and I often G-chatted to pass the time because I'm sitting there for 3 hours, and what else am I going to do? Work. Say hi. So to give you an image, while we're having this conversation about how to donate an organ, I'm sitting in a room with 40 dialysis patients all around me attached to machines. The conversation about donating a kidney would change completely the life of any person in that room.
So the next morning after this conversation was Saturday morning, and I texted my aunt, and I said, all right, I'm willing to do the funeral. And we decided, okay, we're going to meet the next day on Sunday at 4 p.m. to discuss the details of the funeral. And then I ended that conversation, again, this is via text, and I said, oh, and by the way, I hate to sound insensitive, but I heard that you were donating Natasha's organs, and I have this friend who's been on a donor list for a kidney for over 2 years. I was just like, what do you think? And amazingly, she was super gracious and said, you know what, we would love it if one of the donors were connected to us somehow.
So looking back through the texts and the chats that we shared as I explained the highly regulated and intricate process of donation, I continued to share that even though I probably wouldn't be a good match, that this was an incredibly amazing thing. I'd been told by several doctors that I was going to be really tough to match, and that my wait would probably be between 8 and 10 years if everything went well. Because organ donation is a tricky thing, there were many conversations about process and procedure to try to designate one of the kidneys for me. I was hoping to be a comfort, but honestly, I had no anticipation that I would be receiving this kidney. Over the last 2 years, I've tried to make sure that I didn't have information about the donors who were being tested. It all felt really strange to me. Of course, I know I'm loved, but my concern was that people who were not a match would feel like they had disappointed me somehow. And the ones who didn't want to be tested because they were afraid of what donation would mean would think that I would be disappointed in them. So me and my family and friends were all together on this crazy psychological roller coaster of trying to navigate the whole donation process. It's a process that on this Saturday changed for me. A process that after passing of a loved one, the family has to notify the hospital, do a ton of paperwork. That goes to a company called One Legacy, which then goes to an organization that monitors all donations, organ donations, called UNOS. Then that goes out to, in my case, UCLA. Then they do a ton of cross-matching with blood from me that they have on hand against the organ, and then a call goes out. And that's what the process is.
And so learning, about this stuff from Mrs. Hahn, it was pretty clear that even giving her priority for my cousin's kidney, it didn't really mean a whole lot. Because it's really, when it comes down to it, it's all about the match. If it's a good match, that's what's going to do it. Priority didn't mean a whole lot. And again, the chances of a match were so slim. But Mrs. Hahn just kept saying, I don't want you to be disappointed because it's slim chances, but I'm just so encouraged that somebody is going to get a kidney.
So on Saturday at 1:12 p.m., the text about how to contact One Legacy began. I had one more Operation Christmas Child packing party to go to. So I went to that, and as I left that, the door shut, and I got on the phone. And as I walked to my car at 2:48 p.m., I got a text with an attached photo of the One Legacy form that had all the information the family would need. So as I walked to my car, I looked at this, and after a few more texts, I contacted Isabel, Natasha's mom, and I gave her all the information she would need for the form. I was so aware of her tragic loss and was in awe of the calm conversation that we had to begin the process. I've never had such an overwhelming sense of grief for a friend and family, at the same time having this cautious, bubbling joy of, is this really happening? Could this really happen?
So a couple details about the organ donation process from my family's side. So many of you might think that the decision to donate my cousin's organs was a no-brainer. Like, you think, of course you donate. She's brain dead, she's not gonna live anymore, of course you donate. But I imagine that most of you also don't know the process of what that's like. The painful process of answering very obtrusive questions about her life. While she's still in the hospital, her body was still there, and my aunt and uncle had to go through lots of questions, again, very obtrusive ones. That was really painful. And then also the painful process of determining which organs that you donate. And they went step by step through, do we want to donate this, heart, liver, kidneys? Do you want to donate her skin, her veins, the cornea in her eye, tendons, ligaments? I have a daughter, and I could not imagine what that was like. It must have been absolutely grueling. And I think for them, for anybody, it would have been just much easier to say, we're not going to donate, we don't want to go through that process, just let it be. But my aunt and uncle were very courageous, and they were very generous. And it was their painful sacrifice that brought life to many people.
So at 11 o'clock that night, I got a call. In just under 9 hours, we had gone from a conversation about sharing information to my first phone call. My husband answered the phone, and I made him ask, who is it? Just to be sure. No one calls my house at 11 o'clock at night. Everybody knows I'm in bed by 9 at the latest. He says, it's UCLA. So I got up, I got on the phone, and I said, hello? And she said, well, clearly from the sound of your voice, you don't know what's going on. And I said, well, I know there might be a thing, but I'm not sure if there's a thing. Is there a thing? Is this a thing? And she said, yeah, this is a thing. You were, the cross match was negative. And when she first said that, I thought, oh, okay. But what that meant is that it was a good match. She said, I will call you in the morning, or someone else will call you in the morning, and we will tell you what time to leave to go to UCLA to get your kidney. Okay, so I got back in bed. I got out of bed. I jumped around the room a lot. I was a crazy person. I walked through the whole conversation with my husband again, and then I had to call my mom because I hadn't told her any of this was going on. And my mom is sitting right over here, and she's the one who was supposed to be in charge once I got the call. So she was the one who was told that she would have to be with me day and night. She would have to measure everything that went into my body and everything that went out and manage all my medications, and it was this huge job. So I called her and I said, okay, so here's what's going on. Told her about the call. She freaked out a little bit, but we ended the conversation the same way we had ended every other conversation. This might not happen. It might just be a process that we're going through, because they can get you into the surgery suite and say, this isn't going to work. And the doctors had always said, don't be disappointed. Many people get all the way to surgery and it doesn't work out. So don't be too excited, just do the process. And we said, okay, we'll do the process. So I went to sleep. In the morning at 9:12, I got the call. Pack your bags, you're getting a kidney. At 9:23, I texted Drew, just got the call, heading to UCLA. Still being cautious, but I couldn't help be a little bit excited as well.
So I get this text, and I'm sitting in church, and I pull out my phone, and I was in shock. I just could not believe it. And I think I wrote something back like, I'm texting in church, and I don't care because this is amazing.
And I was laughing at that. And we were on our way to UCLA, and Drew sent me a message from his aunt. And the message said, every cloud has a silver lining. From the depths of grief, a comforting word from a mom. I'm a mom. I had a hard time relating to being able to do that. The gracious words will always be with me. But the one that clinched it was the next text I got that said, you're part of our family now. That was kind of awesome. So we, all of my family and I, all of the members, 15 of us, headed to UCLA. We got there. We took the place by storm. There was nobody there. It was a Sunday. We waited. We talked to every person who came in. They told us all the steps that were going to happen. I had to change rooms. I had to change my clothes. I had to get all the preparations done. But our job was to sit and wait in our 8th floor Ocean View hospital room at UCLA, still thinking, this is crazy.
And so all of this is happening. And on my end, again, this is Sunday afternoon, I'm preparing to meet with my aunt and uncle to talk about the funeral details. And as I mentioned, that afternoon, the same day, we were meeting at 4 p.m.
So my family was whisked away to the waiting room, and my mom and my husband were by my side as we headed off to the surgical suite. And as we sat in a long hallway talking to the anesthesiologist, we kept talking about the fact that, is this really going to happen? Because we knew that we were approaching the last moment that it could be called off. And as we were sitting in the hall, I'm laying on a bed, I'm ready to go in, my mom and my husband were behind me, and Dr. Chin, who has the most amazing huge smile, runs down the hall, bouncing, carrying a box, and on the box it says, kidney. And I'm like, what? And he turns around and he goes, hey, it's good. We're good to go. That was the moment that we all looked at each other and thought, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is not happening at some point in time. This is happening right now. My surgery was at 4 o'clock when he was meeting with Phil and Isabel.
And it's the strangest thing to have two polar opposite emotions very deeply at the same time. I felt tremendous pain and loss over the loss of my cousin, and yet tremendous joy for Mrs. Hahn at the same time. I was absolutely thrilled and really almost giddy for what was going to happen with Mrs. Hahn. I mean, the chances of her being a match were so small, and to know that it was my cousin, and to know how long Mrs. Hahn has been waiting, and to know that ultimately this would save her life, like, this was a freaking miracle. And yet, at the same time, I felt kind of this awful pain. My sweet, sweet cousin, who I watched grow up, she was gone. And I would never be able to see her again. And unless the Lord's grace broke through in her final moments, she didn't know him. And this is the kind of emotional pain that you feel in your body. And I know some of you guys have felt this pain. Some of you guys are feeling it right now. I know there's been a lot of pain this year at this school. And sometimes it just feels like it's too much. Sometimes we just don't want to feel it anymore, and we look for ways to control how we feel. And this is exactly what Natasha was going through late that Wednesday night. It was about an hour or so before she overdosed. She tweeted for the last time, Natasha Heim is, and I quote, a self-destructive mess. She didn't want to feel what she was feeling anymore, and drugs were her escape. She wanted out of the chaos, and now she's gone.
So the surgery was supposed to take between 3 and 5 hours. It took 2 hours. By 9 o'clock, I was back in my room with my family and Grace, Natasha's kidney. She was already performing like a champ. Each day in the hospital, Grace grew stronger and worked like a rock star. My labs were good and improving every time. No complications. It was a great match. A match that only God could have created. A match that God created out of tragedy, facilitated in love, and made it clear that He alone was in control. Starting the next day, I was up taking walks, moving quickly toward minimal dietary restrictions instead of the maximal dietary restrictions I had been on for the last couple of years. Seeing parades of doctors, nurses, care partners, friends, family at all hours of the night. As I told them the story of Grace, every new person who walked in the room had to sit there and listen to my story about Grace. As I ate potatoes and guacamole and tomatoes and pumpkin brownies, thank you, Mrs. Salzberg, for the first time in about 3 years, it was becoming clear that it had happened and that my life was actually new. I had been told I would go home after 5 to 7 days. On day 4, I went home. The transplant coordinator had come in to give me instructions for the care and feeding of Grace. She told us about the fact that Grace was a great match for me. I've got really strong antibodies, and Grace was partnering with them really well. By the way, she still is, because she's still a rock star. There's a virus that about 80% of the world's population has. I don't have it, which made me hard to match. Grace doesn't have it either. Natasha didn't have it. That one fact alone changed my medical protocol for all my pharmaceuticals that were to come. When I went home, the pharmacist brought a bag, like a grocery bag, full of medications. When I went home for the first month, I was on about 50 pills a day, trying to kill off my immune system, while at the same time keeping me well. I was alone a lot, and we anticipated that it would be thousands of dollars for medication. The bill for the first grocery bag of medication, because it was such a good match, was $112. My second refill was $78, and the latest refill, after the 13 medications I was on, I'm now only on 7, and with the last refill, I only paid $43. That's ridiculous. Even the pharmacist said that was ridiculous. The transplant team came by one last time, and the social worker, dietitian, coordinators, nurse practitioner, doctors, fellows, students, and others were part of the parade that wished me well and set me free to go home. And at 3 o'clock, I walked out on my own, fully equipped and informed. Our anticipated daily trips to UCLA at 6 a.m. were changed to once a week because Natasha's kidney was doing such a great job. The doctors have always referred to her performance as phenomenally well or perfect. A huge, unanticipated blessing. Drew had texted to invite me and my family to Natasha's funeral. I was unable to go because for the first month, I wasn't allowed to be around people because my immune system was suppressed. On the other hand, my parents were honored and they attended. They were greeted at the door by Isabel with a hug.
And so we made it to the funeral, and I had the opportunity to welcome everybody there into the grieving process, to encourage them not to numb the pain, but to get help and to find somebody to talk to reach out to someone that can make a difference. I also got the opportunity to remind everyone that Natasha's life was more than just this tragedy, that she was an amazing young woman, and that God loved her dearly. And I got to also share that God used this tragedy to bring new life to many, literally. And that He used the sacrifice of my aunt and uncle to donate Natasha's organs to literally bring death into life, to bring beauty from the ashes. And I got to share at the same time that on the largest scale, God did this same thing by sending His Son to die so that we might have new life. And for me, months later, the pain still continues. But at the same time, so does the hope and the joy.
About 2 years ago, I sat here and I told those of you who are juniors and seniors what this journey was and what was going on with my kidneys. I went back and reread what I shared with you that day, and I'm going to share with you exactly the same thing, modified to after I have received the kidney. But it's as relevant today as it was then. In order for me to have a long, healthy life, someone else had to make a sacrifice. There was nothing that I could do to make it happen. All of their criteria was set, and I had no influence over it at all. I couldn't buy a kidney. I couldn't work harder for a kidney. I couldn't make a kidney. I couldn't forcibly take a kidney from someone else. I could only try and maintain my condition of not worse as I continued dialysis and just waited. So think about that for a minute. The criteria for the donor was set. The only viable donor was an exact match to that criteria. I couldn't influence the donor in any way, and the donor alone, or in this case, her father and mother, would determine whether or not the sacrifice would be made. This decision was made completely outside of my control. The result of the sacrifice meant that I am changed, and I had nothing to do with it. All I had to offer was 2 bad kidneys. But with Natasha's kidney, who I call Grace, because I did nothing to deserve her, and I got her anyway, my blood will be made clean, and my life is changed thanks to the sacrifice of her family in the wake of extraordinary grief and loss. If you stop and think about it, we're all in that same situation. We're tainted by sin. We're in a constant state of not worse. And regardless of what we do, we can never work our way to being better. Not through the good things that we do, not in our desire to be closer to God, not in an exhausting effort to be obedient while we continue to come up short. The criteria for a restored relationship with God is perfection. Only one person in all of history has met that criteria. You had no influence over that. God alone has determined that the sacrifice of his Son was the cost to spend all of eternity with each of you. Jesus in your place to pay the price for your sin. The decision was made completely apart from you and outside of your control. The result is that his death meant that you are changed and you had nothing to do with it, but receive it by his grace. You have nothing to offer in this process but a response to the vague understanding of what he alone has done. But with the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, God has met the criteria, paid the price, and bought you with the blood of his Son. In Romans 5, it says this: "Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through this life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation." From the depths of pain and loss, the ultimate demonstration of sacrificial love.
Let's pray. And so, Father, pain and loss and grief and heartache, God, they are a part of our world today, God, as a result of our sin. And yet, God, you have not left us alone. God, your presence is near, as well as your comfort, God, and your love and your mercy. And God, not only that, but you take the mess and the pain, God, and you work miracles and make it good and turn it into good. God, so what a blessing that is, and we praise you for the miracles that you worked and for the miracles that you worked through this story and in Mrs. Hahn's life. So thank you for that. Pray a blessing of continued healing for her. Thank you for this time. I ask a blessing on these students as we go. Amen.